It's Eye on the Illini, and it's Portal Kombat time. Matt, this is an exciting time of the year for Illini fans and maybe a scary time of the year. We're going to find out pretty quickly here how good Pat Embleton is as the essentially the general manager of the Illinois football team, because I've seen more names across the country of people going into the transfer portal. Just keeping track of it seems impossible.
Yeah. Do we need a graphic for tampering portal season? Because
Yeah.
that's already happened, right? I mean, it's Friday, January 2nd at 11 a.m. when we're doing this, and so the portal window is now officially open, folks. Tampering portal season has been open for about a month and a half. Like I've told people, and Brett Bielema, to his own credit, in the Smith Center, has been pretty open and honest publicly, saying, I know guys are being contacted on my roster. I would be naive to think that I haven't been. I've said that before. And I give Brett Bielema and that coaching staff a lot of credit. Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about the way that, and I've actually wanted to do a piece about this because Brett Bielema has sat down with me and talked about this, about what they've done in terms of getting ready for the start of today all the way to January 16th. And what I mean by that, Mike, is quickly, Brett Bielema kind of did a Chinese wall in the Smith Center, which was, if you're on my coaching staff, I want you to focus your time on trying to make the 2025 season the best it can be with the guys we have on our roster. And if you're in our personnel staff, like Pat Embleton and Nate McNeil and some of those other off the field analysts that are kind of just monitoring portal and fits for, on certain rosters, I want you doing that. I don't want you focused on the guys that are in our roster, right? I don't want you to focus on retainment. I'll take care of that. Like you focus on what we need going forward for 2026. And so there's kind of been this neat Chinese wall that Brett Bielema has created where he gets to hop back and forth between the walls, but everybody else has a specific task right up until now. And now your Barry Lunnies and your Aaron Henrys and your 8 other position coaches now are involved in trying to make the 2026 roster, highly involved in trying to make the 2026 roster better, because there's no more games for the 2025 season. And so I do think that tampering portal season for Illinois gets people a lot more nervous and a lot more on edge, because they see more people right now before January 2nd walking out the door, and they don't hear about the people that might be walking into the door of the Smith Center pretty soon. And I think you're going to get some more of that conversation. We're going to talk about some guys that are walking out the door, but I think that fans are very quickly going to get excited about people that are going to walk into the door as soon as this weekend, as visits start for portal guys to take their campus visits. And you're going to start to see that type of reporting too, as you've seen. I really think a lot of the national guys, quickly, Mike, you see them go, hey, so-and-so is getting in the portal. Well, I'll just spill the tea on this. A lot of the national guys and even guys like me, it filters down to guys like me. We get connected with agents, and agents like text and go, hey, my guy is now going in the portal. Can you put it out on Twitter? And that's how you see those national reporters go, so-and-so is in the portal. And I was like, I didn't even know he played offensive guard for NC State. Like, you know what I mean? It's one of those deals. But this is right up until January 2nd. I really thought a lot of people were going to panic like normal because they hear about people walking out the door, in the similar way to like when the basketball season ends and you start to hear people are going to enter the portal. Well, then, Mike, a week later, what does happen? We start to hear about guys that from the portal that are going to come to Illinois, right? It's the same thing with football. I would suspect that by this weekend, you're going to hear a lot of names that might excite Illini fans, and as they start to try to fill these holes. And I think it could be really exciting for our subscribers here at IlliniGuys to start hearing names about how this guy and this guy and this guy could help plug holes for the 2026 season.
And I think two things can be true. One is Illinois is good enough now that their players are going to be targeted
Sure.
by opposing coaches and the intermediaries who do that back channeling, as it's called.
Sure.
So they may call a player, you may have, a high school coach call another high school coach who coached an Illinois player and said, hey, Tennessee's interested in you, and see if there's interest. And of course, at the same time, Illinois is good enough that if Illinois has interest in a player has to go, I should think about this because I could win 9 or 10 games every year.
Well,
which
I'll just tell you, yeah, Mike, I'll tell you a quick story about how this actually happens. I'll just say for an Illini Guys subscriber, the good way, which is, again, Brett Bielema and Josh Whitman are insistent on doing this. I will just call it the legal way, the right way. I don't know what the right way means, but according to the College Sports Commission, the legal way. So I've already heard that Brett Bielema will know that somebody's in the portal. And so Illinois is really, really good, and they have a good reputation of the family thing. I don't want to say that it's real, but that it is a real reputation around the country that Brett Bielema deals with his players in a very, very real way, in a very transparent way, and their experience at Illinois once they walk in the door is usually pretty good, right?
yep.
So Brett Bielema can't directly contact that player legally until January 2nd, today. So what's been happening, and I've heard about this with at least 3 targets that Illinois has in the portal, is that Brett Bielema will call the parents of a current roster player on the 2025 roster and say, hey, can you call this kid or call his parents and tell them about the experience that your son had playing on my roster and being a part of our program? And because Bielema deals directly, he's a relationship builder in recruiting, the parents will absolutely 100% do that. And so I've already heard of parents calling people in the portal, having Zoom meetings with players in the portal, where the coaches can't have any contact until January 6th. We have to have plausible deniability, but they're already hearing a recruiting pitch from parents that say, hey, my son had a great experience, and here's why. And you know what? Here's how my son also had some mountains to climb and had some adversity at Illinois, and here's how he dealt with that, and here's how the coaching staff and the personnel staff and the counseling staff, all of it helped him deal with that. And so all of those things have been done during the tampering portal season, and I think that's a really unique way that I've heard that Brett Bielema gets his message out without having any tampering charges on his record, which is, I think, the best way to let people know what you're doing is have parents of players say, yeah, hey, this was a great experience for Johnny and here's why Coach B was a really, really good person to have in his life, and yada, yada, yada. So I instead of having maybe boosters call up and say, here's the number or whatever, Brett Bielema right now has had parents call recruits and say, here's the experience. You'll get the number eventually, but here's the experience first.
I think the key there is, and Bielema kind of proves it on a day-to-day basis over 5 years, is if you just treat people with respect, you get an awful lot back. And if you take the time to actually pay attention to the player who's sitting in front of you in the moment, as opposed to not having time to deal with the player or deal with the player while you're doing 500 different things. I think that difference of being in the moment that we hear time and time again from parents and players, it's a real thing. And it's something that's been lost in today's world of people who just, are multitasking or not really paying attention to that individual sitting in front of them. And it's got to feel different to the player because of the propensity of the rest of us to not do that. So I think that's a good thing. Let's take a look at kind of what is going on here. And of course, you can see, maybe we go through the transferring outside. I don't know that we need to go through every name, but as you look at this, you see a lot of people, that on there that you look at and you go, well, Cole Rusk, boy, he played a lot this year. Vernon Woodward was a high potential guy who didn't get onto the field. Caleb Patterson started. David Alano, obviously very good. Ashton Hollins, there's a lot of names on there that are good. JoJo Hayden. But at the same time, they may have people ahead of them that they know about that maybe your average fan doesn't know about. And maybe they looked at it and said, I could go somewhere else and try to cut a deal where I'm going to get some money or more money to play and maybe less people in front of me. And if I get on the field, they're certainly confident in their own skills to make a difference. That's a calculated risk, right?
Yeah, and I also think the roster number was going to get weeded down as well. I don't think Illinois thought they were. I don't feel like in 2026 Illinois, and Bielema has talked about this with us after he talked about it with Whitman. I don't think the actual roster number was going to be as high as it was in 2025, because I quite frankly I don't think Brett Bielema up until now felt comfortable cutting people, and he didn't think that was a way to do things. But this is a way for Brett Bielema to cut people. He talked about it after that second bye week, Mike, where it was like, not a whole lot of the veterans and guys that have a lot of playing time are doing these practices during the second bye week. And the reason for that was I need these down the depth chart guys to show me what they can do so that they can prove to me that they should, I'm using Brett Bielema's words, should be on the roster. Why should you be on the roster in 2026? And so I think a lot of that is what you're seeing in a lot of these names that are transferring out. There are a couple of I'll use the word surprises, even though that seems to bother the head coach. Brett Bielema doesn't ever seem to be surprised, especially if you read his social media in the last couple of days. But I think there are a couple that I'll just tell you as one of the beat writers for Illini football, I don't know the plan yet. And that's okay. I'm not really supposed to know the full plan. I even will admit that, but I'm interested in what the plan is. I'm interested in what the plan is at place kicker. I understand what David Alano did, and anybody who was around Nashville and around the program. I mean, I got there on that Saturday, and I had heard that David had basically told the coaching staff, here's the deal, here's why I'm leaving. And it was like, okay, we understand this is a business, and that's a hell of an offer, David, and you should take that kind of thing. We understand. It's a really, really big offer from, I'll just say, the SEC school that has a lot of oil money that you can understand why he and his dad were investigating, and we're kind of surprised at the offers that came on the table. I think David's one of the best kickers in the country. I think he has an NFL future. I think but he needed to be fully compensated for the degree at the University of Illinois that he's not going to get anymore. And because he's not on the list of players that either graduated in December or are on schedule to graduate in May. So his last year, this will be his fourth year in college and next year. And so he will be graduating from the school that he transfers to, which is kind of also interesting quickly because, there still is an admissions issue at the U of I that if you've been at a school 3 years and you haven't graduated, they really look at you kind of weird. And people remember a lot of the admissions people going like, hey, we don't mind taking grad transfers, but we won't take a 1-year transfer undergrad kind of thing. And a lot of other schools will. And so that's an interesting element to what makes Illinois unique to a lot of these other power schools that are just making business deals. The other one, and I actually don't see his name on here, but it was a late entry late last night, was Malachi Hood.
Oh, yeah.
I don't.
Yep.
I mean, the list keeps updating. Trust me, folks. We're doing a really good job of keeping you updated list-wise. But Malachi Hood and his representation, his agent, announced to a lot of national guys that I'm in the portal. Now, Steve Sturm, one of our analysts here, did a really good job of letting people know, well, that doesn't necessarily mean Malachi won't be on the 2026 Illini roster, and he's correct on that. But it's hard for Brett Bielema to get past that. He did it with Xavier Scott. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He did it with it was Tyler Strain. I'm sorry. It was Tyler Strain who announced he was getting in the portal, and then he got out of the portal because he wanted to be back at Illinois. It can happen, but Brett Bielema is a relationships guy, and usually these are after meetings. But I will say that Malachi did play 30-plus snaps in the Music City Bowl as basically the second starter behind Dylan Rosiak at middle linebacker. And the only reason that Malachi Smith surprises me is I think he's a really, really talented middle linebacker. I think he's going to get picked up by a power conference school. I don't have any inside information on that. I just think he's talented enough to play middle linebacker at a power conference school, my assessment. And I don't know the plan other than Grant Bierman at middle linebacker for next year. That's okay. I think that the people in the Smith Center have a plan for middle linebacker opposite of Grant Bierman, but you need to. And because not only just because Dylan Rosiak, remember his injury history, if he goes down, what are you going to do? They do sometimes play a lot of 4-2-5. And so Illinois does need 2 starting middle linebackers. And so I thought Malachi Hood was going to be the other one opposite of Grant Bierman, because I just believe that starting this spring, Grant Bierman's going to go right into the starting lineup. They love everything about him. And I talked to Dylan Rosiak about him, and they just love him. And also, Keanu Ogaluga is not coming back. He's graduating as well. So you've got James Kreutz and you've got Grant Bierman in that room, and you need more depth. And so, and you got Jack Paris as a reserve in that room, but you need more depth. So I'm interested in what the transfer portal plan is at middle linebacker. And it's not to say that I think that it's what they're doing is a mistake. I just think that there's a lot of questions about the Archie McDaniel's room, and I'll be interested to see how they answer them, because going back to what you said, Mike, quickly, Illinois is in a position right now where they have all Big Ten players like a Dylan Rosiak at those positions, and so they can sell themselves, and they have revenue share money that can say, hey, we can compensate you pretty well for playing middle linebacker here for a year or two. And so I'm interested in what the plan is for that second and maybe even third middle linebacker spot, because it's pretty you saw with the secondary, Mike, that when Xavier Scott goes down and you don't have depth pieces that you feel really all that confident with, things can go to hell really, really quick. So this is the point. This is the 14-day window where Illinois can build some depth now officially. And I'm just interested in seeing now that Malachi Hood, who I thought really, really highly of coming out of the Chicago Catholic League, and did some really, really good things in his Illini career, how they go about replacing that, because that's a pretty integral part of what Brett Bielema feels like is the middle of his defense.
Yeah, and I think those are all fair comments, and I think people tend to look at like, oh my God, what are we going to do to fill the hole? When that's what Brett Bielema, trust me, he's got a folder for everything. So he's probably thought about, like, if JoJo Hayden leaves, what do I do? He's probably got a list of.
He's another one in the middle linebacker room that's not going to be there anymore. And so now, you got to build up that depth. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what the plan is. And I am not in the camp that I don't believe they don't have a plan. They also might have to pivot a little bit when plan A doesn't work. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
That's exactly what you have to do, folks. One of the questions I got was, how many quarterbacks are Illinois going to look at? And my guess is they probably got a list of 4 or 5. They may have 1 or 2 that they like better than 3 to 5. But the bottom line is you have to be able to pivot. And if you want any other explanation for that, pivoted from Hudson Card to Luke Altmaier was probably the best pivot of all time, because Illinois got the better guy, even though the consensus across the country was that Purdue pulled the fast one on Illinois and got the man they wanted. Again, Brett Bielema's got a file and he's got an idea of what he's going to do. And Luke Altmaier turned out to be a guy that could be the man who is right up there with Dave Wilson in reestablishing the Illini brand.
Well, I'll give you 2 more quickly, Mike, that if you look at the declared for draft list, J.C. Davis is a stalwart at left tackle. He started the last all of his 25 games at Illinois at left tackle. He was a stalwart. He was a guy. He was the definition of plug and play, right? You get him from New Mexico, you plug him into left tackle, and boom, you got yourself an all Big Ten left tackle. Okay. I think we might have figured out in the bowl game that Nathan Kanapik might be somebody that they feel really good about putting maybe on that first team offensive line starting in the spring, which is a complete revelation, because everybody thought his older brother, Aiden Kanapik, who was the 1-year transfer from Idaho, was going to be that guy. And I think Aiden still will be, but he never got 100%. But then that's okay, because it was supposed to be the, in case of emergency, break glass year for Aiden. So he's not healthy. Cool. We'll redshirt him like we were going to. And I think he could be an option at the other tackle. So I think when Illinois fans go, well, geez, what are we going to do with tackle because JC and Melvin are gone? Maybe they plug in the Kanapik brothers, and that's why you build depth internally so that you can replace those guys. You look at a Gabe Yakus. Where did that strip sack come from? That strip sack came from the exact person in Joe Barna that was replacing Gabe Yakus in the starting lineup for the Music City Bowl. Brett Bielema's talked about Joe Barna as somebody that can come in and emerge as a really big factor. So I really come out of Nashville thinking that now their draft guys are really, really talented. Gabe's going to be a top, I think, 3-round draft pick. I think J.C. Davis is obviously going to get drafted as a left tackle. But they may have internally found those spots to replace those guys, and they don't have to go into the portal. And now maybe you can go look for a lower level person to replace the Joe Barnes spot and replace the Nathan Kanopik, Aiden Kanopik spot for depth purposes, because those FCS guys want to come in and prove themselves at a higher level. Those D2 guys want to come in and prove their guys at a higher level. That's when you find the Nathan Kanopiks and the Aiden Kanopiks, like they came from Idaho. Like you find the Joe Barnes of the world. So Brett Bielema does a really, really good job of building up depth internally so that when these guys in an old school way go to the draft, we have at least a guy that we feel like is really, really talented and just needs the reps to replace them with. That's how they feel about Grant Bierman at middle linebacker. So I think the declared for draft guys, I feel a lot better about maybe Illinois not having to spend buku bucks in the portal replacing those guys, because internally they have already guys under contract that can maybe fill those spots.
Yeah, and let's also talk though realistically. David Alano, magnificent kicker, got no issues with him. But when Illinois is going to spend right around that 15 million, mark, when you take the $22 million cap that's out there for all your athletes, and then you decide how much goes to football, which roughly 70%, you can use a sliding scale, but roughly 70% goes to football. Well, when you're not doing some of these things, like LSU is already out there saying they'll spend at least 25 million on their roster, which is over the cap for the entire athletic department. I don't know how that's okay, but it is. When they're doing that, LSU, Texas A&M, other schools have made some rumblings about it. In this case, Illinois may not be able to afford what a David Alano can make from one of those schools and still conform and fill up their roster. So there are times that you just give a guy a thumbs up, congratulations. You wish them well unless they're playing the Illini, because that's going to be potentially life-changing money for them, especially because a pro contract is not a guarantee. And you move on, and you can't panic because of what you said. You find other talent from other areas that may be just as good, but isn't as heralded, doesn't have the experience. And that's part of the reason why David Alano can demand the price that he can, because he's won walk-off games in high-pressure situations. And somebody may need that because they don't want to be in a situation where they lose early in the CFP because of that. And so budgeting's a big deal.
Yeah, what I will say about David is that when Brett Bielema mentions the statistic that they're 13-4 in one-score games in his era at Illinois, I'm sorry, but David Alano is a huge part of that. And having that kind of a kicker and having that kind of, basically, Luke Altmaier called him money. He called him the best kicker in the Big Ten. He's one of the best kickers in the country, and I think he's right. You have to be able to be – what is one of Brett Bielema's 3 keys to winning? He says cover kicks, but it's special teams, right? It's the kicking game. It's the kicking operation. It's making sure that when we put David Alano out on the field, we're going to get 3 points, no matter what. And you saw the last operation, that last drive in the Music City Bowl. That's about putting the ball exactly where David Alano wants it so that he can make the kick and to make it look like a chip shot. And again, I sound like a broken record here, but I'm interested in what Illinois' plan is at kicker, because they do have Lucas Asada, the transfer from North Carolina, who was David's backup all year. He is a very serviceable field goal kicker and a very serviceable kickoff specialist. But I don't know if very serviceable gets you 13-4 in one-score games in the Brett Bielema era. I'm interested in what the plan is if they want to go into the portal for a kicker, and we'll see what that is. David is going to make a power conference program very, very happy with the consistency and the clutchness and quite frankly, let's just quote Major League, the marbles that David Alano has sometimes in those pressure situations. I think Illinois is going to need something similar to that if they, from a skill standpoint, if they want to continue, winning the Bielema football 101 type of way in one-score games. But I do think that everybody at Illinois is very, very understanding, let's just say, of the number that David Alano and his representation got, and the fact that it probably just wasn't in their budget to make sure that David Alano stayed in Champaign-Urbana for his 4th year.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, you wish kids good luck. The
Hmm.
one thing I would argue to anybody is if if you want to hold these kids to some sort of standard that they have to be true to their school and you play the Beach Boys song in the background, that's fine. But you tell me the last time you had a chance to double your income to take another job or make a substantial, I'm not talking about $5,000 more, but make a substantial income that you've turned down a job that pays more. And I think generally when I ask that question to adults, I don't get people say, "Oh, well, yeah, I would." I'm like, "Hey, if somebody
Oh
asked you to
yeah,
do your job that you're doing today for somebody else and you make 40% more or whatever the number is,"
right.
most people say, "Yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat." So
But I
don't
also,
don't be
yeah,
throwing rocks at kids for doing what
right. And
you
I
would do.
also think that on the flip side of that, Mike, for the rest of his life, Luke Altmaier will say, "I'm from Illinois." And that's a
Exactly.
kid exact from Mississippi who had no ties to the Midwest, but developed a very, very powerful relationship with a lot of people at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And quite frankly, did not have a great experience at the SEC school that he was at before, to say the least. And Luke Altmaier leaves Illinois with the opportunity, I think, that one day we're going to be retiring his number 9 at Illinois, retiring his jersey because of the experience that he had, and honestly, the experience that his parents, Chad and Betsy Altmaier, had here while they were at Illinois. It's the same thing where I'm unbelievably interested if Tommy DeVito would ever say that I went to Syracuse, or would he say I went to Illinois? A lot of these kids, they go to like 3 schools, but when I use the what's the Sunday Night Football thing where they do the starting lineups, like which
Yeah.
school is that kid going to say he went to, right?
Yeah.
I truly believe Luke Altmaier would say I went to Illinois, and I actually think, I don't remember if Tommy's actually started a game on Sunday Night Football, but I venture to guess he might either say Don Bosco High School in New Jersey, or he would say Illinois instead of Syracuse because of the experience he had in 1 year in Urbana-Champaign. So that matters to people. And again, I sound like a broken record, but we put the graphic up, and I think from Christmas to January 2nd, Mike, Illini fans get inundated with so and so is leaving. And this is the point starting this weekend where I think Illini fans are going to start to hear, hey, at least this person's coming on a visit, and has it narrowed down to Illinois and a couple of other schools. And I think that's going to be exciting for Illini fans to see who's interested, because you're right, Mike. The 19 wins over 2 seasons, the revenue share money that's now come in, and just the overall cachet of the program, I think Illini fans are going to get excited about the quality of player that want to be coming on these visits to Illinois in these next couple of weekends, because they see it as a program that's on the rise and not a program that just got propped up by Luke Altmaier and a couple of assistant coaches, and now it's going to go to hell again. If Brett Bielema is still there and a lot of the other coaches are there, Barry Lunny has pledged his services for the 2026 season. So I think there's a lot to be said for recruits want to be at Illinois now. And I think that,
And
and it's not just like eye rolling Brett Bielema talk, but I do think they are turning people away that they necessarily wouldn't have turned away in 2021 or 2022.
yeah, and one final thing before we pivot over to the CFP,
Sure.
um, for Illini Guys subscribers, and if you want to join, this is a good time to join. But what do you have coming up in terms of stories about recruits coming in that people could say, "Hey, maybe I should try a subscription"?
There is a official visit this weekend from a group of 5 quarterback that I think I've already kind of hinted at on our Portal Kombat board. But I'll have a piece up on Illini Guys this afternoon, at least sending to your desk, Mike, this afternoon, about a quarterback that Illinois is very, very interested in. And he's very, very interested in Illinois. It's between Illinois and one other SEC school that I think Illinois can fight that battle with, quite frankly. And so that's exciting. I do think that Illinois is, Zeno Joe has done a really, really good job of putting together shopping lists of potential guys that he's talked to that may have popped up on the Smith Center web radar. And then, I'd like to think that you're going to start to hear these names, and I'm going to start to hear some of these names. But I want to caution people that the Smith Center, the guys in the Smith Center are still very, very, they feel like these lists are their property and they're their intellectual property. And they don't want it out there because this is their time to shine, man. This is their intellectual property. This is their time to shine. And they don't want these lists getting out there because they do know that there are Power 5 conference programs that don't build relationships, that just hop, skip, and jump. Like they just hop on whatever school Illinois is going after. And right. I know that happens. When we get leaks, we get really excited about it because the leaks don't come all that often out of the Smith Center, at least for me. And it's not because the coaches hate me. It's because they protect this stuff like it's their own intellectual property. And I understand why. They don't want their lists out there. And so when we hear about a kid coming in for a visit, we know that it's really, really serious because they've already crossed their I's and dotted their I's and crossed their T's to know that this kid wants to be there. So you're going to, from now until January 16th, Mike, I promise you're going to get extensive, transfer portal content, because this is what I do now. Short of Sean O'Green's continually upswing in women's basketball, this is what I do right now. And so trying to figure out all of the questions that are going to get answered for the 2026 roster is my CSI job right now. I'm having to do the autopsy on 2025 and figure out how we can save the patient and make it better in 2026. So
yeah, should be fun.
They've already done that in the Smith Center with guys like you said, Pat Hamilton, Nate McNeil, and some of their other player personnel. We also have a staff member that needs to be hired now after Thad Ward left for back to Kansas State. Illinois needs a running back coach, so that will happen too. And so, but I do think that I don't want anybody. Here's the last thing I'll say before we get into CFP. I don't want people to see all of these names and think that Brett Bielema still isn't big on retention. I've seen that on our boards. Again, I think the roster in terms of numbers was always going to be smaller in 2026 because, guys, you've seen my snap count numbers, right? Look at the amount of people that play. It's not more than like 50 or 55. And I'm not saying they're going to have a 55-man roster, but there's a reason why the travel roster is 74 players. And I do think Brett Bielema is trimming the roster simply because having a guy on a roster and having him never play just doesn't make any sense anymore, right?
For either way, right? For the kid or for the school.
Unless you're a true freshman and you just need to get integrated into college and into like a weight program and honestly be needed to, like, if you need to gain weight or change your body, not playing right now isn't a real big thing if you're not a true freshman or you're not an incoming player with time left. So I do think that they were always going to trim the roster, and you're starting to see a lot of teams over the country trim their rosters because now we're into the post-COVID rosters where COVID rosters just exploded to like 120 players because everybody got grandfathered in and then you had all the people come in. I think we're getting away from that now. You're getting away from the seventh year seniors, the 25, 26, 27-year-old seniors. And so I think a lot of, and again, we have to pay players now. Everybody kind of has smaller rosters because what can we afford? And so Brett Bielema is still huge on retention. It's still a huge part of what they do. It's just, I don't think the rosters are going to be as big in 2026. And so that's why you're seeing a huge laundry list of players leave because they are probably going to go someplace else and play a lot more than they were at Illinois. And it has nothing to do with Illinois didn't recognize their talent. It's just, we don't have a spot for you anymore. And so, you've seen it a lot at the basketball side, Mike. Just because Brandon Pazinski goes and scores 25 points a game at Santa Clara does not mean that Illinois did not see his talent at Illinois. The Illinois coaches did not see his talent. It means that he was better off being at Santa Clara and he found the right spot. Luke Altmaier found the right spot at Illinois. That doesn't mean that the Ole Miss coaches didn't want Luke Altmaier. It means he's better off going somewhere where he could play for 3 years and start for 3 years. And that's what he found. Zachary Franklin found the best spot for him at Illinois that he could not find at Ole Miss. And he was not able to stay at UTSA. So a lot of these kids, the transfer portal gets a bad rap sometimes. And I feel like the transfer portal is a reason why kids can find the right spot for them after they make, a choice as an 18-year-old that maybe wasn't the best choice for them. And so that's the good part about this. And I can't stress enough that I do think Illini fans are going to get really, really excited about the type of talent and the type of names that are being brought to the Smith Center this weekend and next weekend to try and fill these roster spots.
Yeah. So let's pivot now over to the CFP. Sure. My biggest thought on what we saw was I think there are 3 positions that you have to have success.
Okay.
And regardless of whether you get a bye or don't get a bye, although it figures there's only one coach who wins games is the guy who gets a bye. That's Signetti. It is what it is. The guy just, he's going to stake his claim as the best coach in college football if they win the title. And I'm not going to be able to argue with him. But let's take a look at this. In my opinion, you have to have the quarterback play to be able to survive.
Yep.
But it's a team sport. So if you have to have the quarterback play, that means you have to have the guys who can protect the quarterback so that he can show his skill set, or you need the guys on the other side of the ball who can put enough pressure on the quarterback that he can't show his skill set. If I am in the portal, this is me, and this is why Brett can listen to me and go, that guy's an idiot. But if I was doing it,
me too,
it would be offensive line, defensive line, and a quarterback. The rest of it I'll fill in. But if I can put the other quarterback under duress, I'm probably going to win. If I can keep my quarterback protected, I'm probably going to win. And if I have a quarterback like Luke Altmaier who can make the passes, who stays calm and cool, and he's protected, holy cow. Because as good as Luke Altmaier was this year,
right,
he got sacked over 30 times. What does his season look like with a little bit better good fortune? And he's only sacked 15 times.
Yeah, I heard that stat from Tennessee beat writers all week, like in Nashville. Let me remind everybody, he got sacked 8 times at Indiana. Yeah. So, like, if he had gotten sacked like 2 times at Indiana, Illinois would probably be in the middle of the Big Ten in sacks allowed. Like, that awful night in Bloomington takes Illinois stats and just kind of like makes it kind of wonky. I'll just put it like that. But you're right. Like, I do think I couldn't agree more. I would only add a 4th maybe element is you need a go-to offensive player. I'm watching the Miami Ohio State game, and Miami has everything that you're talking about, right? They have an NFL they have the closest thing, I think, to an NFL defensive line, the closest thing to Georgia's 2022 defensive line that I've seen. I think Miami and Texas Tech just both loaded up in that category and just decided that was going to be how we got to the playoff, and by God, they were right. But I also think that Miami has Malachi Toney too. And, I mean, they have Baby Jesus. He's referred to as Baby Jesus. And you need a go-to offensive player.
Well, but Ohio State has Jeremiah Smith. I mean,
and that's how they stayed in the ball game, Mike. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
but we've seen, though, Matt, now the Harbaugh did it first. But if you're playing a Ryan Day team,
right,
all you just have to figure out how you're going to beat them up on the lines. And let's be real honest, folks. That's only going to happen with about 5 teams in the country who can pull that off.
That's why if
you recruit right.
Yeah. My Malachi Toney, my Hank Beatty, if you're in Illinois, you're Hank Beatty, you're Jeremiah Smith. That's my 4th, priority on the list. Yep. I just wanted to add it as a 4th.
I agree.
My number 1 priority is defensive line after what I'm seeing in this college football playoff. Like, if you go and you get dudes on that defensive line like Miami did and like Texas Tech did, and quite frankly, like Oregon has done the last 2 years, you have a chance. By God, you have a chance. I do agree that offensive line, especially, I think it gets negated, but like interior offensive line, centers. Pat Coogan is a huge part of what Indiana does up front. The transfer from Notre Dame, who's the center for Indiana, huge part of what Indiana has done the last 2 years. What Indiana has done this year, and up front they move people. And so, yeah, I do think that helps. And then you go and you spend a lot of money on a Fernando Mendoza. You spend a lot of money on a Carson Beck, which is kind of rolling the dice sometimes. But, there are times where you get the Carson Beck who was an Elite 11 quarterback and was worth $4 million. Like, that's sometimes what you get, right? And I also think, Mike, that I saw something. I agree with Dan Wolken from Yahoo Sports. I do think that this is, good. We make grand, pronunciations of what this is. We have 2 years of data of the college football playoff, Mike. 2, okay? That's not enough data for me. But when we make grand pronunciations and proclamations as to what we see, I do think that this is the new money semifinal with Oregon, Indiana, Miami, and Ole Miss. This is new money. This is not old money. Old money is home and not playing anymore. New money is in the semifinals. And so it's interesting to me that that's the case. But I do think that the Miami that I thought I was going to see earlier in Mario Cristobal's tenure is now happening, which is we are just going to take a bunch of hammers and beat you to death with them. And if you can survive it, I joked with somebody, Mike, before they lost to Oregon yesterday, I would have loved to have seen a Miami Texas Tech national championship game because I think the team that had a quarterback survive in that game was probably going to win. I just think that is a team that beats you with physicality because that is who Mario Cristobal is. And it's funny, Mike, because I do think that they used the Michigan playbook from Jim Harbaugh. And honestly, when Sharon Moore was the offensive coordinator, that we are just going to pound you physically and get to the fourth quarter and you're going to give up and you're going to tap out. That is how Harbaugh beat Ohio State. But that's just Mario. That is what he brought to Alabama when he was Nick Saban's offensive line coach. That is him going back home to the U. And that is him. That's the way that he plays, man. They don't take knees. They run it up the gut on you. And sometimes that works and sometimes it blows up in Mario's face. But he isn't the best game manager in the world. But man, if it was,
what though?
If it was a boxing match, Mario would win it. And I think he is one of the toughest. Mike, I've heard when I go to the AFCA meetings, the American Football Coaches Association meetings, there's a term that gets thrown around now, and it's FFC. I won't tell you what the first F stands for, but the second two letters stand for football coach. And I'll just use freaking as the first F. Like, he's a freaking football coach.
Well, but look, we also hear the reality is yes, some guys are better at clock management than others, but I had to hear how Kirby Smart was the best coach in the country and
Kirby's pretty good.
Was one of the dumbest go for fourth downs that I've seen. So even if you're the best, you still are human and you make mistakes.
Right.
So
I would also say, that as we get into, like, say, the Rose Bowl game, we quickly talk about the Rose Bowl game. There were two elements to me that I thought was really, really apparent. One is, again, physicality won the day because I felt like Indiana just physically beat the hell out of Alabama.
Which was a sentence we never thought we'd ever say. I never. If you would have told me that you're going to say Indiana physically beat the hell out of Alabama, I would say in basketball.
Yeah, right. But that's what Cignetti's done, and that's the culture that he's built there. And it wasn't shocking to me, and it's why they were a touchdown favorite against Alabama. The second thing was, and I know that Illinois fans are going to want, and IlliniGuys subscribers are going to want to vomit in their mouth when they hear this, but I'm a Big Ten fan. I thought it was cool to see Indiana fans in the Rose Bowl because it hasn't happened in my lifetime. And like when that stuff happens, like when Barry took Wisconsin to the Rose Bowl for the first time and I was a kid, that's just cool. Like when Iowa finally got back there for the first time since the 80s, and I'm like Christian McCaffrey ran all over him. Like I still thought that was cool. Like when fan bases like that, when Zook took Illinois to the Rose Bowl for the first time since '84, that's really cool because fans don't get to always. I think there are Indiana fans that in their lifetime they never thought they'd get to Pasadena, and God knows they never thought they'd get to Pasadena and then watch them beat the hell out of a power conference opponent 38-3 as a favorite, as a touchdown favorite. That's why That's why Indiana fans were crying at the Big Ten championship game because they never thought they'd see this in their lifetime. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and
Um,
look, I
but
despise Indiana
me
basketball
too.
because of that
Me too.
Illinois-Indiana rivalry, but the Indiana football program would, I don't even know if it's arguably, it may be the biggest turnaround in the history of American sports
It may be.
because they've been historically for 120 years the worst, and now with Signetti, they have. I mean, they may not win it this year, but they look like they could. They
Uh-huh.
may go from worst to first in 2 years. That is a unbelievable accomplishment, and I keep reading all the Alabama fans are they're all ready to jump off the Kalen DeBoer bandwagon again, which is why if I was the
Well, he
AD at,
lost the game, Mike.
I know,
Like
but
this
if I was
was,
the AD at Penn State,
yeah,
I would have told him, dude, you are making the mistake of a lifetime staying there, being the
right.
guy following Nick Saban
Well,
because
I think this is Kalen DeBoer's
they're
life
nuts.
now, where every time he loses a
Oh,
game,
I agree.
it's going to be the worst. It's the high school equivalent to seeing for sale signs in your front yard after you lose a game.
Yeah.
That's the high school coach equivalent of that.
Yep.
And that's Kalen DeBoer's life now. I will say that I also think that it's fun. You want to talk about a fan base. You want to flip that, though? Talk about Ole Miss's fan base right now and how they feel about Pete Golding. Because how they feel about Pete Golding right now, I don't think can be put into words.
Is Lane going to let his guys coach the offense for another game?
Yeah. Because I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't know if Lane's aware of this. Lane's not God. And so, like, Charlie Weiss Jr. is a fully grown adult, and he can make adult decisions for himself.
Well, but Lane doesn't have to hire him to go to LSU then, right?
Well, he got on the plane. Charlie got on the plane, and then he got on another plane and got his butt back to Oxford and actually finished the job that he started.
Right, which is the way it should be.
Yeah. Like a rational, mature adult male. And part of that is also why Ole Miss fans feel the way they feel about Pete Golding right now. And I'm fascinated by the idea that he could be football's Steve Fisher, where he just wins the national championship like having never coached a game before the tournament. He gets to be possibly that. And I think it's wild but Miami, who didn't win the barfed up ACC regular season championship, yeah. Okay, didn't play in the game. Okay, they're, I think, a 4 or 5 point favorite against Ole Miss, and so, okay, sure, but I think this Ole Miss team is on a roll because they have good vibe. Because of honestly, they're a good football team. Don't get me wrong.
Indiana versus Ole Miss would be the matchup of the century for a title
it's
game.
New money. That would be new money. That would be
unbelievably
like, hey,
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be. It would be, because you want to talk about two fan bases that didn't think that they would see this in their lifetime. You can talk about Indiana and Ole Miss.
So we're probably stuck with Oregon and Miami, but
I
think
both of those. I put it out on Twitter, Mike, that I put out the semifinal matchups, and I'm just a football fan that I want all parts of the country to enjoy college football. I'm one of those people. I think you got it with this semifinal. I think it's neat. I think the semifinal is neat. I think the rematch of Indiana and Oregon, because I've said it before to you, Mike, I think if I could start a football program, I'd probably hire Dan Lanning to start my football program. That matchup again, because Dan Lanning got insane about how Indiana went down to Eugene and just physically beat the hell out of them. He went insane over it to the point where there were guys on the injury report after the bye week in Oregon where you're like, what were you doing during that bye week, Dan? Just beating your players up with aluminum baseball bats? Like,
well, they're gonna get that again. Now they got a little benefit of the freak injury.
And then you've got Miami and Ole Miss, where I think that's an unbelievably interesting matchup. But I do think you see a matchup now, Mike, where you've got 4 teams in the semifinal, and I can envision all 4 of them winning the national championship. I don't think you're going to see these blowouts anymore. And, of course, both of these semifinal games will probably end in a blowout after I said that. But I think that these are fascinating matchups for all 4 corners of the sport, of the country. And so I do think I'm excited by it. I thought the games – I thought the Oregon Texas Tech game, even though Texas Tech has scored the same amount of points in the CFP as Illinois. Fact. Was fascinating just because, again, you got two coaches that are insane and believe in defense. And then the last game of the night was insane too, because like you said, I was fascinated by the idea that Kirby Smart, who has built his entire reputation on defense, Mike, I am convinced he went for it on those fourth downs because he did not want to put his defense back on the field against Ole Miss. And so just ended up having to play backyard football, just like he did, by the way, in Athens when they came back to win that football game. But I'm really, really impressed with the way that Pete Golding has just rallied this Ole Miss team and gotten them prepared for the playoff in a way that I didn't think they were going to be. And so, again, all four corners of the country, are represented basically in this playoff. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And look, for once, I finally nailed a prediction because I thought Texas Tech was the 1984 Bears. If you remember, the Bears went to the championship game, lost to the 49ers, 23-0. With Steve Fuller at quarterback. And I remember even as a young guy, I've always been a Cowboy fan, but I was like, God, if the McCaskies just would open up and spend a little bit of money on a backup quarterback, they could have beat one of the teams that's considered one of the greatest of all time because that Bears defense was maybe this far behind the 85 Bears.
Well, I have news for everybody.
Cody Campbell's buying a quarterback in 2026.
We've already heard it.
We
know, everybody kind of knows who it is. And so we are not going to be doing the donut theory in Lubbock anymore, even though I do believe they are going to load up on defensive linemen again, just like they did this past year. The donut theory at quarterback has always held Texas Tech back all year. And I don't think Cody Campbell is going to be doing that again this year. This offseason. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, folks, that is our final words here on the transfer portal CFP. Do not panic. Illinois is not going to get one of the top one or two people at any position. Illinois is going to spend wisely and also get talent because Brett Bielema, he understands his ability and is confident in picking out talent. So why pay up here if you can pay lower and get very similar talent? And when you worry about that, think of all the guys who were supposedly better than Luke Altmaier that year, that if Illinois would have paid more money and gotten those quarterbacks, it wouldn't have worked out as good for Illinois fans. So with that, folks, we will be back tomorrow with the post game on the Penn State Illinois game, which will be out in Philadelphia, I believe, this year. We look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Until then, folks, go Illini.